Hello, my name is Roisin and it is November, which means it is non-fiction November, so I thought I would talk to you about my non-fiction book collection. This is all the books that I own physically, some of which I have read, some of which I have not. So I'll have some book reviews and a possibility pile of what I might read in the upcoming month for non-fiction November. I've got quite a few, so let's get into it. I have a pile here of all the ones that I have read, and then I'm going to swap them around in a minute. So the first one on my pile is Maximum City, Bombay Lost and Found by Sakatu Mehta, which is the story of Bombay, which is also known as Mumbai, and that is the city where Sakatu Mehta grew up before moving to Canada and then the USA, and so he returns to Mumbai in about 2006, 2007, and that's when he wrote this book. So it's been really highly praised by a lot of different people, but for me it didn't really work. I enjoyed it somewhat, but I didn't really love it. The reason for that was because it covers various different parts of Mumbai. So we have power, which focuses in on organised crime and corruption within politics, city politics, and then there is also a section on pleasure, which is again focused in on organised crime and sex work, and a little bit about Bollywood, but only really how Bollywood interacts with organised crime and sex work. And then the final part is called Passages, and that is kind of about Sakatu Mehta's experience growing up in Mumbai and then coming back to it years later, and what it's like to be in Mumbai as someone who is from there versus someone who is an expat of some sort, someone who is an outsider trying to deal with the complicated, unofficial bureaucracy of the city. The thing was that he kept talking about how passionate the city is, but for a lot of the time he just came across as really grumpy, and a lot of complaint, and a lot of it is about violence and things that are difficult to deal with whilst living in the city. But he didn't have any of the pleasure and the joy of living in this passionate, vibrant city. There was no positive side to it displayed. I can't believe that there is nothing positive to living in Bombay. So I found this book to be a little one note, a little depressing. He's also a journalist, and I think that he struggled to maintain interest for such a long period. A lot of it felt repetitive because it felt like he had written multiple different articles and then put them together in a book. So fine, but I didn't love it. I'll try and be quicker with the reviews of the rest of these. Then we have Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, which is one that a lot of people love. Robin Wall Kimmerer is a botanist, and in this book she looks at the natural world and connecting Indigenous wisdom, Indigenous knowledge of the land with scientific knowledge and teaching in order to explore ideas of climate change, but more really like ecological change. What do I mean? Habitat change and the change of the specific place where she is living and how that affects both the people and the world, the natural world. Things like salmon fishing and hunting in a traditional indigenous practice versus when that is more industrialised. And it is really, really beautifully written. There is a chapter where she's taking a walk through a temperate rainforest. Stunning, absolutely gorgeous. One where she's just clearing her pond in her back garden. Also really beautifully written, very still, very slow moving. But there are also ones about like government neglect and toxifying of a important lake, and one about the original Bigfoot, like the indigenous version of that. The Wendigo, maybe? But that was really creepy and haunting. She's a really, really great writer. And this one, though slow moving, is a really interesting read. One I read very recently, we have The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. Joan Didion is beloved. She is a California writer, famous for her writing about California. This is the memoir that she wrote of the year after her husband passed away and her daughter was in intensive care, and it is about grief and interrupted grief, and how trauma processing can change when the trauma is ongoing. Overall, I found this a bit too clinical, a bit too dry, and I didn't really take to Didion's writing. It's very journalistic and pared back in a way that I felt didn't allow it to get to the vulnerability and the true humanity of dealing with grief. It was much more abstract, but not academic, because I can deal with abstract if it's academic, but this lacked being either academic enough or vulnerable enough. It just sort of fell between two stools in a way that I didn't love, and I didn't really take to her writing either. But she's beloved, so I know a lot of people do. Someone whose writing I did like and who is more academic on the academic side of things is Cordelia Fine, and this is Delusions of Gender, the real science between the sex differences. This is written in 2010, so it is probably fairly out of date. There's probably quite a lot of updated stuff to it now, but she talks about the science of gender difference between brains, and how good or not good that science is, like the replicability issue, the assumptions that are made going into it, ways that things are maybe cause and effect the wrong way round because of the neuroplasticity and things, so the way that brains are shaped by the world in which we live, not just a natural phenomenon. So it is a really interesting read. She's also a very funny writer for something that is very like science heavy and very fact heavy. Funny writer, and the writing is very engaging and very easy to read. It is fairly binary, pretty much entirely binary, and I think that is in part because she is looking at science that looks at things in a binary way, but there are elements that are connecting genitals to gender in a way that doesn't really make sense. But yeah, it is still a good and interesting read. Feral by George Monbiot, another really beautiful writer. This is about rewilding, specifically rewilding the Midlands in Wales, because very, very much focused in Wales, and he wanders around the Welsh landscape a lot. There are a lot of anecdotes in here of his experience which are really beautifully written and start off very interesting. His sea kayaking, his like trying to find a specific sea creature on a coastal like estuary path, very beautifully written, and you really feel engaged and with him on those cold wet Welsh beaches, but it does get a little repetitive, and his look at rewilding kind of ignores people. There's a chapter at the end where he met someone who he read the book, who told him about the fact that he's ignoring people, history, the landscape, like the way that people are in the world. But he was like, yeah, but I don't care. Like, he didn't really engage with that argument at all, which I found frustrating. But if you are interested in rewilding, I think it's probably a good place to start. He does look at different places where rewilding has taken place, particularly in Scotland, and I think he does have an interesting and quite like a passionate viewpoint. I enjoy non-fiction where there is a clear viewpoint and it's not someone pretending to be objective, because there is no such thing as objectivity really. So I prefer it when it has a clear viewpoint and you know what perspective you're coming at it from. Monbiot definitely gives you his perspective and allows you to see that, as well as giving some voice to some of the other arguments. But yeah, I thought it dragged a bit. I think this could have been an article, really. One that reads like fiction is I Know Why the Caged Birds Sings by Maya Angelou. This is a classic that I'm sure you have heard of. It is the first in Maya Angelou's series of autobiographies. This one is from her earliest days in childhood until she is about 15, growing up as a black woman in the South with her grandma and her brother and her uncle in the 1930s. I think it's about the 1930s when she is growing up, and we follow her in this house in the South in this very racist town, and also going to find her mother and father who live in St. Louis, and living with them for a while, and the various different things that she experiences, from the microaggressive racisms to the more extreme racisms, but also to the violence and sexual violence, to extreme poverty, to the experience of her very black town, and how that differed once she got out into the big city. There's some elements of like organised crime, or like not so much organised crime, but like living on the margins and the things that people do to survive on the margins. It's stunningly written, really, really beautiful. Like I said, it reads like a novel. I think that it is, in some parts, slightly fictionalised. It could be classified either as autobiography or autofiction, but Maya Angelou herself talked about it as autobiography, so we think of it as non-fiction, but it does read as if these people are characters, and there is like a clear narrative arc. There's a moment where she goes down to Mexico with her father, which was really interesting, and it doesn't necessarily go the ways that you are expecting the book to go, and a lot is packed in for it being such a short period of time. But like I said, poverty, racism and sexual violence make it quite a harrowing read, but definitely worthwhile. Absolutely beautifully written. Freedom is a Constant Struggle, Ferguson, Palestine and the Foundations of a Movement, particularly relevant to read right now with the ongoing genocide in Palestine. Angela Davis is a famous feminist black academic who I think was in relation to the Black Panthers, is someone who has constantly been writing about Black Lives Matter and about the precursors to the Black Lives Matter movement, and also about Palestine, and about prison abolition and how no one is free until we are all free. That's kind of the concept of this book. And this is a collection of essays and speeches that she gave during a specific time period, from 2013 to 2015. So it is very much situated in that time period, and I would say it is a primer. Like, if you are not someone who has read a lot about this about Black Lives Matter, about liberation struggles, and about Palestine, then I'd say that this would be a good primer, a good first look into those areas. It's not, because they are collections of essays, and it's not particularly deep. It doesn't go into depth about history or about complex or nuanced parts of the discussion and the ways that we could go about things like prison abolition, but it is a well-written, very accessible primer, and very short. So if you are looking for a primer, then I would say this is a good one to go with. The opposite of a primer now, well, actually still kind of a primer, but hugely chunky, we have Black and British by David Olusoga. And this does what it says on the tin. It is history of Britain and its relationship with black people, from the Roman times with Roman legionaries and consuls and generals and such who were black people who had come to Britain in that time period, and then Black Tudors. But the vast majority of this is taken up with the slave trade, which is understandable both because it is the major moment of British interaction with black people, and also because David Olusoga is a historian of the slave trade. That's his main area of expertise, which you can really tell because of how short the bits both before and after are. So Tudor and pre-Tudor stuff doesn't take up very much space, and nor does the 20th century and its relationship with black people in Britain in the 20th century, which I think could have been done a lot more. Black people from in the First World War fighting in the British Army and in the Second World War as well, and also black people who had been part of the Army and the Navy at that time coming to Britain in between the wars. Those things could have been more expanded on. But for a history of slavery and the British interaction with and creation of and perpetuation of slavery and its perpetuation of itself, the myth of Britain as the abolitionist country, even though it did abolish slavery earlier than some other European countries and much earlier than the States. It didn't do it earlier than Haiti or anything, did it? So its own idea of itself. All of it's very in-depth, very detailed, but told in a narrative way, which makes it much more easy to absorb and understand what's going on. It's not just fact. There is something for you to follow and to correspond to. I think really well written, really interesting. So if you are looking for an in-depth look at the slave trade from the British perspective, then this is a great book for that. If you are looking for a history of pre-slavery black people in Britain or post 20th century black people in Britain, this is much more of a primer overview for that, so I wouldn't go to it for that. I know there is a book called Black Tudors, which would probably be better, but for slavery, yeah, really, really good. So those are all the ones that I own and have read. Now I'm going to talk to you about the ones I own and maybe will read over the next month. I missed one I have actually read, which is The Troubles with Us by Alex O'Neill. One Belfast girl on boys, bombs and finding her way. This is a memoir of growing up in Belfast in the 1990s. So if you've seen Derry Girls, it's the same time period, and it is a fun, easy reading, funny memoir that is focused on the end of the Troubles and her experience growing up in the Troubles and what it's like to grow up in a divided place and not really understand that until you are older, but also the ways that the rest of the world didn't understand the way that she grew up. When she came to university in England, people didn't quite understand what that was like. They had no knowledge of why the Troubles were or anything like that, and having lived in it, it's sort of this idea that it's not unrepentant terror and disaster and maudlinness. It is funny, and the dark Irish humour is particularly strong, but also the way that it was so important to her but so unknown by the rest of the world. Again, I would say very much a primer. If you know nothing about the Troubles, this one is for you. They give footnotes as they explain who people like Bobby Sands are, which is very well known if you know anything about the Troubles. So it is very approachable, clearly written for outsiders rather than people who know anything about the Troubles. So if that is you, maybe pick this one up. So my pile of unread non-fiction is bigger than my pile of read fiction, but I won't be able to go into much detail since I don't read them. But I have 12 books that I own physically, so I'll talk you through them. First one here is Empire Land by Sathnam Sanghera, and this one I got interested in because Doz, who from the channel Doz, I will leave her linked in the description, talked about this one as one to read over the coronation, and it is about the British Empire and how imperialism and the British Empire shaped the way Britain views itself today, its place in the world at the moment, and the way we kind of shy away from understanding the truth of empire in this country. So yeah, one I'm excited to read. It was longlisted for the Valley Gifford Prize and has a lot of praise for it as well. So need to give this one a go soon. Then we have a really chunky biography, which is not my style at all. This is a proof. It was gifted to me by Europa Editions, but it did come out in June 2022 and I still haven't read it. This is why I don't really request proofs anymore. But this is about Belle de Costa Green, who was the daughter of a like one of the first black men to go to Harvard, I believe. He was a famous black academic, but she pretended to be white in order to work for JP Morgan and run his personal library. And so this is the story of her life, told by a novelist, Alexandra Lapierre, and this was translated from French by Tina. This was translated from French by Tina Kova. So interesting to see a French woman writing about an American woman and her experience of racism in the early 20th century. We have The Enigma of Capital by David Harvey. David Harvey is quite a well-known writer. David Harvey is quite a well-known Marxist academic, and I believe that I've heard him on multiple podcasts, I think is how I know him. But this is The Enigma and Crisis of Capital, and it is about the capitalist system shaping Western society, suffering regular implosions, yet continuing to dominate the world. Meltdowns and like depressions that are inherent and built into the capitalist system. So I'm going to give this one a go. I don't know if my brain will handle it well, but it's there. I also have On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century by Timothy Snyder, which is about fascism in the 20th century, the rise of Nazism and fascism. This is a short, brief look at the history of fascism and tyranny and different aspects of that in a very short, bite-sized way. I'm not sure about this one. I think it was very popular about 8 years ago, but I still have it, still haven't read it. It's very short as well, so I can give it a go, then I can have an opinion. Another thing that I tried to get into reading was nature writing at one point. I'm not sure it is for me, so probably we'll have to see whether I actually want to read this or get rid of it. I'm not sure. If you've read it, let me know in the comments whether you think I should read this one or unhaul it. This is The Wood for the Trees, the long view of nature from a small wood, and it is about it's by Richard Fortey, who takes us through ecosystems and time, and I guess goes across the period of a year in his woodland that is nearby, and perhaps goes back in time to what that woodland would have been like, I'm assuming. I don't know very much about it. It does have pictures though, so points for pictures. But I'm not entirely convinced that I actually want to read this anymore. Another proof that I have that I haven't read, we have The Great Imperial Hangover, How Empires Have Shaped the World by Samir Puri. And this is about various different empires over the course of time, including today, current empires, even though they're not known as empires anymore. It talks about empires in the modern world from America, British Empire, the EU, Russia, China, India, the Middle East, and Africa's scramble beyond colonialism, so post-colonial. From Ukraine to Brexit, American isolationism to China's forays into Africa. So it is fairly up-to-date if it's talking about Ukraine. So interested to see what this says about empire. It is another one that has been well praised, but I don't know, we'll see. Again, nature writing, we have The Old Ways by A Journey on Foot by Robert Macfarlane. I'm pretty sure I will actually like this one though. This one I am more intrigued by because I've read some of Underland. I didn't get very far because I had so many other things to read at the time that I tried to read it, but I did really enjoy the writing. So I think I'm going to enjoy this one because of that. And this is Robert Macfarlane walking across Britain through tracks, holloways, drove roads and sea paths that form part of a vast ancient networks of routes crisscrossing the British Isles. So he goes on a pilgrimage across Britain, basically walking through ancient pathways, and I think his writing will be beautiful. I wonder if he will address our right to roam and access to nature, which in this country, England specifically, is pretty poor. So I'll see if there's any sort of political angle on it. It seems like it would be hard for there not to be. Another commie one now, we have The Communist Hypothesis by Alain Badiou. Alain Badiou is a philosopher, well-known philosopher. A demand for universal emancipation and galvanising call to arms. This is published by Verso Books, so you can be assured it's going to be pretty lefty. I don't read a lot of philosophy, but I know that Alain Badiou is a very like accessible philosopher. He's like a popular philosopher. I think he's the School of Life, I think, is something to do with him. This one focuses a lot on the Paris Commune and 1968 and the Cultural Revolution and Mao. So it's very much focused in the middle of the 20th century and was published in 2008. So it is quite a little bit old, so we'll see how relevant it is. One that I've read partially but not finished is The Good Immigrant, by which is edited by Nikesh Shukla. This is a collection of essays about what it is like to be an immigrant in Britain today, or the child of immigrants. I think some of these people are second generation immigrants, and because it's a collection of essays, it's going to have lots of different perspectives, lots of different styles of writing. It includes Musa Okwonga, Coco Khan, Nish Kumar, Wei Min Kam, Himesh Patel, Riz Ahmed, Renier de Lodge. So there's a lot of different people in here, some that I know and have read other works of, or heard in other different perspectives. I know there is like an American version of this now and various different versions of it. I think there's a podcast. Like it did very well. It says, what's it like to live in a country that doesn't trust you and doesn't want you unless you win an Olympic gold medal or a national baking competition. So yeah, one that I know will still be relevant even though it was published maybe 15 years ago now. Only 8 years ago. Okay, I overestimated it. Then we also have one I'm not sure about again, but the quote on the front is from Brian Eno, which is a bizarre thing to be on a book. Anyway, this is Creating Freedom, Power, Control and the Fight for Our Future by Raul Martinez. And the quotes on the back are also from Russell Brand. Like, I'm not so sure about this book anymore. But Raul Martinez explores the mechanisms of control that pervade our lives and the myths on which they depend, exploring the lottery of our birth, the coercive influence of concentrated wealth, and the consent manufacturing realities of undemocratic power. So yeah, it's about freedom, free media, free elections, free will. I wonder if it's going to talk about the free market at all. Anyway, it's a chunky one as well. If you've read it, let me know, because this is another one that I'm not sure whether I want to keep or not. One that I know lots of people love, one that I'm a little intimidated by, we have The Argonauts by Maggie Nelson, which is quite short again, so definitely not intimidating for that reason, but I think it's quite like cerebral and clever. I'm just not sure I've got the brain for it. But this is about motherhood and it's a memoir of Maggie Nelson and her story, her relationship with Harry Dodge, who is gender fluid, and about Nelson being pregnant and the transformations of her body due to pregnancy, and alongside the transformation of her partner's body due to their queer identity, their coming to terms with their gender fluidity. It's supposed to be really beautifully written, really interesting prose. I'll give it a go. But again, I'm just not sure. I'm just not sure that like my brain will work well enough for this one. When people talk about it, they talk about the writing a lot in a way that makes me feel a little intimidated. And then the final one I have, does have a dust jacket somewhere, but I have lost it. So this is the final one I own. It is Women and Other Monsters, Building a New Mythology by, it doesn't have the name on the spine, by Jess Zimmerman. There we go, you can see it there. Now, I have written poetry that is based on Ovid's Metamorphoses, about women who change into things, particularly monstrous women as well, and also obviously the popular non-fiction, the popular fiction genre of unhinged monstrous women, being very popular, very zeitgeisty at the moment. So I'd be interested to read and see how she looks into ideas of mythology, and how that relates to the portrayal of women in other forms of fiction. I think that's what it does. We've got like How to Turn a Man into Stone, which is obviously Medusa, Dogs Below the Waist, which I assume is about vaginas and tartar. I think it also has a kind of memoir aspect to it as well. So I'm going to give this one a go and see if it sparks any thoughts and ideas. Those are all of the non-fiction books that I own in physical copy. I do have other audiobooks and ebooks that are non-fiction, but I'm not going to talk you through them now, or we'd be here forever and ever and ever. But let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you have read any of the ones that I haven't read, are there any you think I should prioritise, any you think I would like? I would love to hear from you, and let me know your favourite non-fiction books in the comments as well. And I will see you again very soon. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and to subscribe, and thank you for watching. Bye bye!